Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another video of FikarNot.com. Now, FikarNot from Studies. So, today we're going to be starting a brand new chapter of biology, and the chapter's name is right in front of your screen, The Flower. Sounds like a great movie, right? But just in general, we all know that a flower is one of the more prominent features of a plant. Now, let me ask you a question. What does a plant consist of? Let's go back to our second grade science, where we learned about a plant and photosynthesis and all of that stuff, right? So, post it in the comment section below and tell me, what does a plant consist of? What is a plant made up of? Post it in the comment section below and let me know what you think, while I tell out the answer over here. So we all know that a plant consists of the roots, and then you have the shoot, which consists of the leaves and the stem, etc. Right? Now we all know that the roots, they're under the soil, so we can't really see them. But the features of the plant that we can see, like the leaves and the stem, they all may be green colored, or in some cases, just some different colors. But then we have the flower. What color is that? Is it green? Well, it can be. But flowers come in various different colors, be it red, pink, yellow, anything at all. You name it, you get it. And this is also how different flowers have different variations. Some flowers have such a great fragrance, like a rose, right? Whenever we want to give someone something, like on Valentine's Day, we give them a rose. Why? Not only because of its red royal color, but also because of its great scent. It has a beautiful scent. But again, if we compare it to some other plant that is extremely stinky in smell, that's the variation. Similarly, a rose may be red, but a jasmine is yellow. So again, you have a difference over there, right? Then a sunflower is also yellow. So you have different types of flowers, all of them, and all of them have different variations. But when it comes to biology, do you think all these different types of flowers have some name? Well, we'll get to know about that further once we get into the chapter. So without further ado, let's get into the chapter. So, the syllabus that we're going to cover in this chapter is flower, structure of a bisexual flower, functions of various parts, etc. Now, you have already learned that the reproduction is the most important function of any living organism for the survival of the species. And in flowering plants, this function is performed by the flower. Alright, so what does this paragraph over here mean? We all know that in order for a certain species to continue, reproduction is important, because let's say we are about 1 billion people in the world right now, okay? 1 billion people. Let's just assume that. Now, death comes to everyone, right? One day or the other, we will die eventually, because it's a complete evolution of life, right? Death comes to everyone. So once, say in 200 years, or let's say a century, 200 is also less, let's just say a century. Let's say a century later, for a century there is no reproduction at all. These 1 billion people will not survive anymore. Most of them will die. The people who are just born will also not survive. In fact, a century is too much. Let's just stick with 200 years. 200 years, if we don't have any reproduction at all, everyone will die. Because what's the maximum a person can live? Let's say at the topmost, probably of 150. Because the longest alive man or woman is about 116 years, right? In fact, I exaggerated when I even said 150, right? So the people who have just not given birth, sorry, but who have just been born, let's say today they have just been born, right? Today is the day that they have just been born. In 200 years, they won't survive till then. So reproduction is very important for continuity of species, and that's why a lot of animals also became extinct, right? And when it comes to plants is also a type of living organism. It is a type of species, right? So when it comes to plant, how does a plant reproduce? Well, the reproductive structure of a plant is called its flower, right? The flower is usually the most beautiful and the most attractive part of a plant. Really, not only humans, be it birds, insects, we all love flowers, don't we? Because it looks so nice and its fragrance is always great. In most cases, of course. So now let's actually talk about some real biology, or let's actually properly get into this chapter, starting off with the structure of a bisexual flower. Alright? Okay. So, flower is a specialized shoot in which leaves are modified into floral structures. So, let's say today I went to the mall and I found a really nice top and it has flowers all over them. Okay, and in specific, I want a floral top. So, is that top the right top? Of course it is, right? So what do you mean by floral? Floral basically means just flowers, right? So what does this definition over here means? Let's try to break it down. What does this definition over here mean? Flower is a specialized shoot. It is a specialized shoot. Now we all know that how is a shoot? First you have the root, then you have your stem, then you have the the leaves on them, and then you have the flower, right? So what is a flower now? It's a specialized shoot, right? Because normally on a shoot you have all the basic stuff which are probably green in color, etc. But then you have one with a totally different color, so bright, so nice, and so we call it the specialized shoot. It's almost like the HOD of the plant, head of department, in which the leaves are modified into floral structures. So the leaves, when they come over here, let's say a leaf is over here. These leaves, so afterwards, are modified into floral structures that open up. So you have one floral structure, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. You have a complete flower, right? Like that, you have a complete flower. So therefore, by combining specialized shoot and modified leaves, you get the definition of a flower. So a flower is a specialized shoot in which leaves are modified into floral structures. Floral as in flower-like structures. Alright. Now first of all, let's talk about the structure of a flower, as in how is a flower made, what is its structure. Like if I talk about our body, I have my toes, then I have the calves, then I have thighs, then I have stomach, then I have hands. That's a whole structure, right? Similarly, let's go down to up for flowers as well. So first of all, there is a stalk called the pedestal, which supports the flower. Now when we say a flower is a specialized shoot, there has to be something that supports the plant, right? There has to be something that connects the stem and makes it specialized into a flower, right? So that specialized structure is in the form of a stalk called the pedestal. It supports the plant. It helps the plant stay how it is. If a plant is bended, have you ever seen a plant which is bended and just like this? Like kept something like this? Don't look at my flower drawing structures. They're very bad, but just bear with me. Alright. Have you ever seen like a tree with many flowers? So those flowers are just in any direction at all, right? Now how can they go in any direction without falling? That's because of the pedestal. Because the pedestal is a stalk that provides support to the plant. Alright? Fine. So you have the pedestal and I'll point my cursor on it. It's right here. Okay. Now some flowers, they may not have a pedestal. So what are those flowers called? They have a specialized name for them called the sessile flowers. What is it? SESSILE. Alright. Then the tip of a flower stalk may be expanded to form a cup-shaped receptacle or thalamus. So now we go up from the stalk, we go to one more part, which is right over here. So as you can see over here, there's this little swollen structure that almost looks like a cup. If I just have to draw a handle and this will become my tea cup for my tea, right? So it looks like a cup-shaped part of a flower. It looks like the cup-shaped part of the flower. Well, this cup-shaped part of the flower is called as the receptacle or the thalamus. It is the tip of the flower stalk. So tip of the flower stalk as in the stalk you have the pedestal, and just at the tip of that you have the thalamus. basically. So it's the tip of the flower stalk that may be expanded, maybe, may not be, but in this structure it is, to form a cup-shaped receptacle or thalamus. Now the floral plants are borne onto the thalamus into 4 whorls. So first you have the pedestal, then at the flower stalk, that's flower stalk as in the tip of the pedestal, you have the receptacle or the thalamus. Then on top of that also, the thalamus bears 4 whorls. This is how the flower actually starts. So first whorl, you have the green sepals, that's collectively called as the calyx. As you can see over here, this. Okay, it protects the flower in the bud stage. Then you have the second whorl, that is the large brightly colored petals. It is collectively called as corolla. And the first whorl, that's the green sepals, they are collectively called as calyx. Then the third whorl, you have the male parts. Okay, now the symbol for male parts, have you ever gone to a mall and seen a restroom having a sign like this, boys washroom right here? Well, this is the sign that it's the symbol for male, right? And the male parts of the plant are long thread-like structures somewhat projecting out, and each usually ending in a bilobed tip. These are stamens. They're collectively called as androeciums. So a male structure is called as a stamen, but they're collectively called as an androecium. So they're almost the same thing but different names, alright? Now each stamen consists of a thread-like filament and a bilobed anther. So they have a bilobed tip. Alright, clear? So as you can see over here, the anther is so small, so light, it's like a thread-like structure. And then you have a bilobed anther. Now for the people who are wondering what a bilobed structure is like, bilobed structure is nothing but with two lobes. So one here and one here, and that's exactly how the anther structure looks like. It has one lobe here and the other lobe here, right? I'll point my cursor to it. One lobe here, and then you have a line, and then the other lobe here, right? So that is what you call as a bilobed tip. Then you have the fourth and last whorl, which is the most protective whorl of all, where the fertilization of the fertilization basically, where the fusion of the male and the female gametes happen. That is the female parts. The symbol for female is this, and it's centrally located pistil that may be formed out of a single male unit, that's a carpel, or of several fused carpels. So basically the pistil, like in the case of the male parts we call them stamens, in this case we call them the pistils, alright? So this is centrally located pistils that may be formed of a single female unit, that's a carpel, or of several fused carpels. So the stigma can be made up of only one female unit or multiple fused female units. They're collectively called as gynoecium, and in the case of male, androeciums. Fine. Now each carpel consists of a basal ovary, a middle style, and the uppermost stigma. So you see, this is what a carpel is like. A carpel is basically, it's a whole package. It looks like this. This is your ovary, this is the style, and this is the stigma. Alright, this is the stigma, and this is what the structure looks like. So a female part of the plant, that's the pistil, it may have one carpel, that's one female unit, or multiple fused carpels. Alright, they're collectively called as gynoeciums. Okay, moving on. Complete and incomplete flowers. So a complete or perfect flower is one which contains all the 4 floral structures. If one or more sets of floral structures are missing, the flower is called incomplete or imperfect. So let me give you an example over here. Let's say I prepared a great meal for you. Okay, today is a surprise day, and I bring this great plate out, this really big plate out, and I give you a salad, I give you a dessert, I give you a starter, a main course, a sizzler, some chow mein, some sushi, some other dish, whatever your favorite dish is, then some vegetables, some fruits, and then some of your favorite meals in the middle. So I give you all of this. So if I give this to you, what would you call this meal? A complete meal, right? A balanced diet, a complete meal. I have everything. I have vegetables, I have a dessert, I have basically everything, right? It's a complete meal. This is what I want when I talk about a meal. But even if I take out your favorite dish and the dessert from this, what would you call it now? you'd call it an incomplete meal, right? Something's incomplete, something's not setting right over here. Well, that is what exactly that's exactly what flowers are. If one of the four worlds are missing, yeah, be it the petals, the sepals, the androecium, or the gynoecium, we call that flower as an incomplete flower, even if one structure is missing. But if all the four floral structures are present, we call them nothing but a complete flower. Alright. Now, essential or reproductive and non-essential or non-reproductive parts of a flower are basically the essential parts of a flower are, you have two, the reproductive structures, right? Because if we call the flower the reproductive part of a plant, it's very clear that the reproductive part of the plant will be the most what do you say, will be the most prominent of all, right? It will be the most prominent of all. So therefore the most essential part of a flower is the gynoecium and the androecium. But the rest, the petals, the sepals, the pedestal, the receptacle, or the thalamus, all of them are very important structures. However, they only support the plant to reproduce. They don't really undergo the process of reproduction. For example, when we give an exam, right, we are the ones that have to give the exam and write everything on paper. Our teachers help us a lot, but we are the ones who get the marks in the end, right? Similarly, in this case, it's basically the same, right? None of us are saying that the teachers, or in this case, the sepals or the petals, are not important. We're not saying that. But they only help you. But the end product is the most essential part of all, right? If you're not there, how's anything supposed to go? You won't be able to give your exams, right? Similarly, in plants, if the stigma or the anther is not there, things will become much more difficult, and self-pollination will definitely not be possible, right? Now, the non-essential, the auxiliary parts are simply the helping parts. Sorry, they're simply the helping parts that help protect reproductive parts of the flower or make the flower attractive for pollination. Like petals, right? They make the whole plant very attractive, and that's what attracts the birds, the insects, etc. We'll talk more about that. Now, these parts include sepals and petals. In some cases, the petals and sepals are undifferentiated, and they're together, right? First, let me go to the next page. Or wait, I'll show it to you over here itself. Okay, so in some plants, the sepals and the petals, they're fused together, and you cannot really undifferentiate them. Like, these sepals that you see over here are just fused with the petals. So a person with really bad eyesight won't be able to differentiate the petals and the sepals. So these plants have a special name called the perianth. What is it called? The perianth. Now, if the perianth is non-green, as in the sepals are also not green, and neither are the petals green, so they are called as petaloid. And now, if the perianth is green like the sepals, it is described as sepaloid perianth. So you have perianth, that is when they're fused together. Then you have petaloid when they're non-green, as in they're not green. And then you have the sepaloid perianth, which basically means that they're green. The petals are also green and the sepals are also green. Alright? Now, one thing to note over here is a perianth, meaning they're undifferentiated, as in the petals and sepals can have their own different color, but they're just fused together. In the case of petaloid, both of them are non-green, and in the case of sepaloid, they are green, basically. So that's the only difference. Just wanted to tell that to clarify any doubts, because over here you can see the sepals they just look like they're outside, right? They have their own space to breathe and everything, but in some plants this goes over here and they're basically just fused together. Next page. Okay, bracts. So what is the bracts now? When a flower arises in the axil of a leaf-like structure, this structure is called as the bract. So in the previous page, we learned that a flower is nothing but a modified leaf. A modified leaf turns into a floral structure. So sometimes these flowers arise in the axil of a leaf-like structure. Now, what is the axil? Axil is nothing but, if we read in the previous chapter, right, the tissues chapter, the axillary bud, one of sorry, one of the tissues that come under the meristematic tissue, right? They help in growth. So sometimes flower arise from those points, and these structures are called as bracts. Now, bracts may be green like ordinary leaves, or at times they're colored. The large and colorful bract of bougainvillea is easily mistaken for a petal. So basically, sometimes there'll be a flower, and a bract or a leaf like or flower like structure, floral structure, will just grow on the axillary, not axillary bud, but the axil of the leaf like structure. All right, it'll just grow one day, one fine day, it'll just grow, and then it almost looks like a part of the flower because it's normally very close. So when you look at it, it almost looks like both of them are the same. For example, if this is my flower, okay, this is my flower and this is my stem and everything, the leaf will come like this. It will grow in such a way that it looks like a petal, and people normally think that, hey, what's the petal doing down there if the flower is up there? So it looks very, very similar, and this structure is known as a bract. Now, they are colored, they can be green, but the shape is also mistaken because it may look like a flower. Its shape also may look like a flower, and that's why it is mistaken very often. In that case, right, it is mistaken very often. Fine. Now, they're basically normal leaves, but they're mistaken to be petals. So again, it can be colored or just normal leaves. Now, the large and colorful bract of bougainvillea is easily mistaken for a petal. The actual flower in this case is small, somewhat cylindrical, and attached onto the inner side of the bract. So in the case of bougainvillea, as you can see, there's a picture over here. So you may think that everything, the pink structures outside, they look like petals, right? They look like petals, and the yellow structures, the flowers that are inside, they look like just normal flowers. But all of them, you can see the pink structures, they're actually bracts. They're flowers that arise in the axil of leaf-like structures, and they look like petals, but actually the main flower is only the small tiny flower that is in the middle. Fine. So those are called the bracts. Then we have the nectaries. So most flowers produce a sweet, fragrant liquid called nectar. Now, groups of nectars secreting cells, nectaries, are situated usually at the base of the pistil or on the bases of the petals. So basically, a lot of flowers, as I said in the beginning, they produce sweet nectar, as in that is why that's also one of the main reasons that attract insects to come to the plant. How do you think the insects take the pollen grains? Because when they're sucking out the nectar from the plant, they carry the pollen grains on their body, and then it basically just flies off, right? It flies off to any other plant, hopefully of the same kind, right? So the most flowers, when they produce a sweet fragrant liquid called the nectar, the flies or the bees or the birds, they can smell such a sweet fragrant, and groups of nectar secreting cells that's called the nectaries are situated usually at the base of the pistil or on the basis of the petals. So it can either be on the base of the pistil, so you have to go down there, you have to go right down there to suck out the nectars and the sweet fragrant liquid called the nectar, and or it can also be present inside the flower, where mostly we see that the bees come and eat their food, you can say. So the nectar attracts insects like honeybees for cross pollination. In some cases, nectaries are very prominent in nasturtium. Alright, so nasturtium is a flower cut medially to show the nectary containing a clear liquid, the nectar at the bottom. So as you can see over here, the nectar is present in the bottom, and this is the nectary, while this is the stalk. Stalk is the nothing but the pedestal, basically. Now let's move on to the next part, that is the sexuality in flowers. So male, female, and bisexual flowers, the anthers of the stamens produce pollen, which forms the male cells, the male gamete. So as we all know, to reproduce, each organism needs to have some kind of male and female cells. Like in humans, right? The man or the male gametes in humans are the sperms, and in females they are the eggs. But in the case of plants, it differs. So in the case of plants, the anthers and the pistil, not the anthers, okay, the, you can say, the stamen and the pistil, they're collectively called as androecium, gynoecium, right? They have the male gametes in the form of pollen grains for males and eggs in the case of females. Okay, now the anthers of the stamens produce pollen, which forms the male cells of the male gametes. The ovary of the carpel bears the ovule, which encloses the egg cell. So you have the stigma, you have the style, you have the ovary. Inside the ovary, you have the ovule. Inside the ovule, they enclose the egg. So it's a long process from there, right? So this is what it looks like. And the egg cell is, of course, the female gametes. Now the stamens and the carpels are the male and the female parts respectively of the flower. So whenever we come across the word carpel, it may seem like a new word, but it's nothing but just the structure over here. One carpel, that's called carpel, basically, right? So the stamens and the carpels are the male and the female parts respectively of the plant. A flower which contains both stamens and carpels is called as a bisexual or a hermaphrodite flower. Okay, so in the case of this flower, these kind of flowers can undergo self-pollination. Why? Because they have both the stamen and the carpel, the male and the female gametes, and the male and the female structures. So it can undergo self-pollination within its own flower, right? So it is called as bisexual. That's two. Bi meaning two, right? Bi meaning two. So bisexual or hermaphrodite flower. Second point, a flower which has only one of these parts, that is having only stamens or only carpels, it is called as a unisexual or incomplete or imperfect flower. That's papaya and palm are examples of such types of flowers. Now these kind of flowers can either go under cross-pollination or any other pollination, basically only cross-pollination, because they're not a bisexual flower. One of the parts are missing, one of the male gametes are missing, or the female gametes are missing. Depends from flower to flower. So of course they're called as unisexual, only one. Uni meaning one. Then a unisexual flower which contains only the stamens, it is called as the male or staminate flowers. Now a flower which contains only the carpels is called as the female or pistillate flowers. So what are the male and the female parts of a plant called as? Stamen for male and pistil for female, right? So stamen, just add a ate to it, staminate, and then pistil, again add a ate, pistillate, basically. So unisexual flower only with male gametes, that's called as staminate. A flower which contains carpels and female gametes are called as pistillate flowers. Then after bracts, nectaries, all those flowers, we have a neuter flower. So a flower in which both male and female reproductive organs are lacking. Example, lay florets or sunflower, pistillate but sterile. Okay, they're called as neuter flowers. So it can be in some flowers both male and female gametes are present. In some flowers, only one of them are present. Now, in some plants, none of them are present. So they are called as neuter flowers. So a flower in which both male and female reproductive organs are lacking. They cannot undergo any type of pollination in that case, right? Example are ray florets of sunflower. They pistillate but sterile. Okay. Now, next part. General description of the floral plants. So now that we went through all the different types of parts of a plant and the four whorls, right? First whorl is the calyx, that's the sepals, then the petals, that's the corolla, then the stamen and androecium, and then the last and the fourth whorl that is essentially placed in a flower, protected with all those whorls. We have the pistil or the gynoecium. So starting off with the calyx. Calyx, they're also called as the sepals, and usually there are 5 sepals. Sometimes there may be less, or in a few cases even more. So the maximum or average number of sepals in a flower is 5. Now this can range 0 to 5 or 5 to 10. 10 is just a estimation. It can be even more. No idea. But 5 is the average number in this case. And there are usually 5 sepals. Now sometimes there may be less, or in a few cases even more. The sepals may be free polysepalous or fused gamosepalous. Now sometimes, as in a hibiscus, a shoe flower, there may be a second series of sepals called episepals, and they're collectively called as epicalyx. So as we know, what does a sepal look like? What does a sepal look like? Let's go back over here and let's see what a sepal looks like. A sepal can be free and opened like this, just opened into onto their own structures. They may almost look like leaves here. So they may completely open and they may form a new flower below the actual flower. So such sepals that are free and they have space to breathe, they are called as polysepalous. But what if these sepals are fused together? What do we call them then? They're called as gamosepalous. So sepals may be free or they can also be fused. Now sometimes in the case of hibiscus, there may be a second series of sepals. They are called as epicalyx. So this means that there is one row of the sepals. Let's go to this image. There is one row of sepals, but then below that there is one more row of sepals. 2 rows. It's almost like a frock now, right? So it is called as the episepals or the epicalyx. Now when the flower opens, the sepals may fall off or persist, and the sepals are usually green, but in some cases they are brightly colored, called the petaloid that we saw above, right? As in the gulmohar, the flame of the forest, where they are red. Okay, this is just an example. Now sepals can be colored, as we just saw, and once the flower opens up, the sepals may fall off. Why? Because as we have learned in our lower grades, the main function of the sepals are to protect the flower in its bud stage, right? Because the sepals then opens up, and once the flower is opened up, there are high chances that the sepals job is done and the sepals may fall off, right? So that is the main function of sepals. Okay, now as you can see over here, it can be polysepalous, as in it can have several. It can basically just be free, and gamosepalous as in together, like this, like a cup shaped again. Okay, and then this is also gamosepalous. So it can be completely closed and look like a crown, or it can be somewhat like this. Depends. Okay, this is completely free. So it's called as polysepalous. This is not free, fused. It's fused, and it is called as gamosepalous. Okay. Now let's move on to the second word of the flower. That is the corolla. Oh wait, we missed a line. The sepals protect the young flower bud, and when green, they also perform photosynthesis. Exactly. That's exactly what we have read in our previous grades, and that's exactly what I said as well a few seconds earlier. Okay, now moving on to the second whorl of the flower, that's the corolla. Petals. Now the petals are generally arranged in a single whorl, but sometimes there are many, and they can also be double whorled. Example, a poppy, or in a spiral. Example, a water lily. Right? Now they may be free, that's polypetalous, or united, that is gamopetalous. So you see this difference over here, right? Gamoless, or just is, right? So in the case of sepal, gamosepalous, and in the case of petals, gamopetalous, or it can differ on the names. So if it's petal, gamopetalis. If it's sepals, gamosepalous. So again, the petals, it may be free, open, or they can also be together. Like there is no space at all. Right? It can also be like this. Okay. So on the basis of that, it is polypetalous and gamopetalous. Now, the main function of petals are to attract insects for pollination. They also protect the stamens and the pistils, especially when they form a tube. Tube when they go under the process of fertilization after pollination, of course, right? Now, let's move on to the third wall of the flower, that is the male part of the flower. The androecium, the stamen, the anthers, the filaments, the pollen grains, the pollen sacs, everything is in here. So the number of stamens in a different flower may vary from few to a large number. So stamens are the ones that actually open up and they burst open when they mature, and then they land to the male part of the female part of the flower that contains the eggs, right? Because the eggs cannot go up, but the pollen grains are very light, so they can distribute into the air, they can easily fall off, anything like that, right? Now, just like the you can have a lot of stamens or very less stamens. Very small, probably 2 to 3, to 10 to 11. It can be very small to a very large number. Okay. Now, each stamen consists of a long filament, or you can say a thread-like structure called the filament, and the anther, which is below bed, right? Attached to its extremity, the anther is usually two-lobed, as I said. Each lobe has pollen sacs. So, the stamen consists of a long thread-like structure called the filament, as I said, just like this. And just at the tip of it, just at its extremity, you have the anther, which looks like this. Now, the anther is two-lobed, one lobe and the other lobe. Both the lobes contain pollen sacs. Now, 4 sacs in total. Okay, both of them. So, inside these sacs also you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 sacs like this, right? There are 4 sacs in total. Okay. Now, within the pollen sacs, you have pollen grains. Now, when fully matured, these pollen sacs rupture to liberate the pollen grains, and the pollen grains are generally powdery particles of different shapes and sizes. So, based on the agent of pollination, the pollen grains can be dry, they can be sticky, they can be big, they can be small, they can be of any type, right? They can also be covered in a waxy coating, okay, based on the agent of the pollination. Okay, so as we've also learned in our previous grades, this is just a little more advanced version of that. The pollen sacs contain the pollen grains, and when they're mature, they rupture and they liberate the pollen grains, and the pollen grains are generally powdery particles. Okay, again, depends upon the agent of pollination, right? Now, these are some examples. This is how the pollen sacs and the pollen grains looks like, and this is the filament. Over here, the filament may look very thick, but in general, it's very, very thin. I mean, you don't even need to put a scissor. Just by wind, it can break off. It's that thin, but it's strong as well. Okay, and these are some types, and these are the pollen sacs containing the pollen grains, and the pollen grains from different plants show different shapes and sizes, so it can be of any type basically. Okay, now in androecium, stamens may be free, polyandrous as in petunia, or joined in several ways, single, doubled, or in several groups. Okay, so as you can see over here, androecium, as I just said, they can be free, completely free, just open, okay, into several strings like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just into several strings, it can be completely open. Or it can also be joined in ways of single, double, or in several groups as well. So those also have their subtypes, and those also have their names. Okay, they have their names. First is Monodelphis. Okay, they are a single group. They only have a single group of stamens. Then you have Didelphis. They are 2 groups. And then there are Polydelphis. There are several groups. So you can see there are just bunches. That's 1 bunch, 2 bunch, 3 bunch, 4 bunch, 5 bunch. Over here you have 2. This 1 and this 2. And over here is only 1. Complete. Just 1. So, Monodelphis, our stamens are united in one group by their filaments. Okay? Only anthers are free. So the filaments are just a bunch. Have you ever given roses to someone? So how do you hold a rose? How do you hold a rose? By their stems, right? Similarly, in Monodelphis also it's something like that. The filaments are all attached together, but this anthers are free. They're not exactly attached together like a flower, right? They are free. Okay, so the filaments are the actual ones that are bonded together. Then you have the didelphis. The filaments are united in two bundles. So this is one bundle, you can say one bundle, and this is two bundle. Okay, and then you have polydelphis. That is, filaments are united into several groups. So this is also one group, this is also one group, this is also one group. You have several groups. Now there is no exact number. It can be of any type. It can be how much ever, right? Now how to remember the three terms? How do you remember the three terms? Mono, di, and poly. Several. Not only in this, but also in chemistry. We have learnt about mono, di, and poly, right? Monatomic, diatomic, polyatomic, all of that, right? So they mean by single, two, and several. Now, Adelphis literally means group of brothers. Here, referring to the part from which the anthers grow out in bundles. Thus, the bundles of anthers arising from a single part, that's Monodelphis or Monodelphis. Then the bundles from two parts, that's the diadelphis, and from several parts, that's the polydelphis. Now, Monodelphis, you can pronounce it in two ways. That's Monadelphis and Monodelphis. But I prefer Monodelphis more. Okay? Alright. Moving on to the fourth and the last word of the flower, that's the gynoecium. Basically, all of the things that we learn over here it's very similar to what we have learned in our previous grades, but again, just a little more advanced version of that, right? So the gynoecium, also known as the carpels, the gynoecium is also known as the pistils. They have several names: carpels, gynoecium, and pistil. Okay, so they're also known as the pistil. It is composed of one or more carpels. Each carpel consists of three parts. That's the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Now, the stigma is the terminal knob-like part. Okay, it may be divided into two or more lobes and may assume a feathery appearance. The stigma is covered with hair or with glandular papillae. Okay, it serves as the landing place for pollens during pollination. Okay, so what are they saying in this paragraph? Now, a stigma is a terminal knob-like structure. So, as we saw on the previous page as well, it almost looks like a knob and it has a head like this. Okay, we all know that it receives the pollen grain, so it has to have a knob-like structure like that. Now, it may be divided into two or more lobes and may assume a feathery appearance. Now, most stigmas, they may look feathery, but they actually are not that feathery. So they may assume a feathery appearance. They may be also divided into two or more lobes. We don't know. And the stigma is covered with hair or with glandular papillae. Okay, you can pronounce it however you want. Now it's a glandular papillae or just hair in general. Both of them are the same. They just arise from the root hairs of any structure. All right. It serves as the landing place for pollen during pollination. That's why it also has a terminal knob-like part. Then moving down, you have the style. It is a tubular, slender stalk which connects the stigma to the ovary. So if the stigma receives the pollen grains, how is the pollen grain supposed to travel from the stigma to the ovary? Well, the connecting part or the transportation to this is the style. Okay, it has a tubular, slender stalk which connects the stigma to the ovary. Then the ovary is the swollen basal portion composed of one or many carpels. The inner cavity of the ovary may be a single chamber or divided into several chambers, that's locules, each containing a number of rounded bodies. The ovules, the cushion or swollen region in the ovary attaching the ovules to the wall of the ovary, is called the placenta. Okay, so now in grade 8 we have learned about reproduction in animals, or you can say humans, right? And mainly we have learnt about a wall called placenta, right? So now before I come to that properly, let's just read through this paragraph and let's see what they have to say.